We'll get to our lead story in a moment, but first this. More bombshells dropped at the state capture inquiry today, with the Gupta brothers dragged through the mud. Lord Peter Hain has testified how global banks allegedly overlooked the Guptas' looting. For more on this story, Erin Bates joins us now live. So, Erin, of course, a day of bombshells, as we say, and you are speaking to the man himself.
Shahan, we're at the state capture inquiry venue here with a friend of South Africa, as he calls himself, on standby. Of course, the focus today being corporate enablers and banks who've contributed allegedly to the state capture project. I'm going to jump right into it with Lord Peter Hain. Before we get into the thrust of your evidence, some people might be asking, what qualifies you to be speaking on these themes?
Well, I was originally from South Africa until my parents, who'd been jailed and issued with banning orders in the anti-apartheid struggle in the early 1960s, were forced into exile, and I, as their son, was too. And then I was a leader of the British anti-apartheid movement, particularly stopping all white Springbok tours in the late 60s and early 70s. And so I have South Africa in my blood, and I've been asked to help out in terms of the international complicity in this criminality of looting from South Africa on a prodigious scale, a monumental scale. And it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been helped by the international banks, by international corporates, and by foreign governments not acting to stop the money laundering and criminality.
Certainly, and that takes us squarely to the financial heart of London itself. You've criticised HSBC, for example, and it's well known that despite laws, there's a lot of laundered money floating around buying property in high ends of the city. So how much does Britain and its companies need to answer for here?
Well, I think all foreign governments, Britain included, should hold up their hands and say that this money, by the billions of rands, could not have left South Africa other than through the international financial system and through banks like HSBC, like Bank of Baroda, like Standard Chartered, which have all got either London headquarters or London offices. And so I think it's incumbent upon the British government, but also upon other governments, particularly Dubai. The United Arab Emirates government has done nothing about the Guptas who live in Dubai, who have a house in Dubai. The Indian government's done nothing about the Guptas. They have homes. They've built a recent temple with the proceeds of this criminally obtained money from South African taxpayers. Same with Hong Kong. The money went through these banks to all these jurisdictions and others in the Caribbean. It's not just corrupt politicians and ministers and public officials who helped the Guptas loot in this way and took a cut and a fat fee along the way. It's also corporates and banks and lawyers and accountants and others who helped them do it, and that is not acceptable. The international assistance given to this monumental looting has just got to stop, and people should own up to it and stop pretending to be hiding behind various excuses.
Now, if we look at this commission, it works from the sort of standpoint of alleged state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector and beyond. You're steadfast that these crimes occurred, that they were committed by people with very strong political connections, and that there's accountability for which states, governments and private entities need to account. What makes you so certain?
Well, I think everybody knows from the investigative exposés in the Daily Maverick by programs such as eNCA and others what has gone on. Everybody knows there's been looting on a monumental scale, and the way that South African institutions like the South African Revenue Service, the National Prosecuting Authority and others, particularly state-owned enterprises, have just been plundered or rendered dysfunctional, or that they don't work properly. People aren't prosecuted. They don't get the taxes from the bad guys and the criminals. They just get it from all of us, who are honest citizens. And that whole system, the Commission obviously has got to use allegations. We know it's true. We know it's happened. And I have been asked to help the Commission today to submit a 10,000-word document of evidence with proposals about reforms to stop this happening in the future, particularly the international thing, and also was previously asked from within South Africa to whistleblow and to expose the corruption a few years ago in the British Parliament.
I'm interested in that point because you've previously disclosed that it was senior members of the ANC who knew you from your own activist times, who'd mandated you and given you this crusade to really blow open the allegations around HSBC, for example. You were leaked those sensitive banking details by a whistleblower. Who exactly was it and how close are they to the current sitting president?
Well, the information that I received was under former President Zuma's rule, so President Ramaphosa was not in power then, but I'm glad that he is, because he's internationally respected around the world. But it was leaked to me, given to me rather, not leaked to me, given to me by people inside the state system, deep inside the state system, and also inside the financial system. Otherwise, I couldn't have fired the ammunition if they hadn't. I couldn't have fired the bullets if they hadn't given me the ammunition.
But who was it within the ANC's upper echelons that you knew from your struggle days who said, we need international pressure, you have the kind of access and proximity to the heart of power in the UK that we want you to put this matter on the agenda?
Well, I've never revealed the people who asked me to do this because I didn't want them to become targets. But I think they were acting in the national interest of every South African to expose this and to help create a circumstances in which there's been a change of president, in which now there is a commitment to tackling corruption and getting to the bottom of this, and this commission is an absolutely vital means of doing that. And what we need at the end of its report is action, and quick action, because these guys are continuing to loot.
Well, we might need it before the end of the report. We heard about the process that needs to follow, and in a way there's an argument that your testimony today was a bit of an own goal, because as things stand, assets haven't been seized, extraditions haven't been secured, cases aren't being prosecuted by the prosecuting authorities. So as much as you speak about urgency, you do so in a context where it's an inquisitorial process, not a prosecutorial one.
Yes, but I can only play what role I'm asked to play as a person who resides in Britain. But, you know, it's time that Dubai and Hong Kong and India and other countries like Britain started admitting that they have been conduits for the proceeds of this financial crime through the financial institutions, and that the corporates, often headquartered in London or New York, that have all known to South Africans as having got fat fees from the Guptas and others for the state capture and facilitated this corruption. The international dimension, which has been the focus of my evidence, that is absolutely crucial. This didn't only occur because there were corrupt ministers or politicians. It occurred because the international community wasn't doing its job to stop financial crime, and in my view still isn't doing it. So this could happen again unless there are big reforms in the way banking works, the way the financial system works, and the way that governments, particularly some of those I've mentioned, operate. It's not good enough to say this is a South African problem, this is an international problem. Trillions of dollars a year are laundered and looted around the world, and it's going to continue if it's not stopped.
Now, a contemporary of yours, one could say, the late Lord Tim Bell, of course, comes up in relation to Bell Pottinger and its role in kind of, flooding South Africa with a certain political rhetoric. I'm interested to know why that wasn't more of a focus of your evidence today. You yourself were the subject of criticism over your critique of Bell Pottinger receiving, handsome fees for doing work in South Africa, sitting with its headquarters in the UK.
Well, when I named Bell Pottinger in the British Parliament, they went out of business the following week. It wasn't only me who was responsible for putting them out of action, but it was also others who'd exposed them. Bell Pottinger, as you say, a British headquartered global company, was responsible for the most pernicious, systematic lying operation in South Africa, using social media in the main, but not only that, paid handsomely by the Guptas. And the important lesson of the Bell Pottinger episode is that their job was to manage the reputation of others. They forgot about their own reputation for being up to their necks in criminality, and they went bankrupt as a result. It's one thing for the KPMGs and the Bains and the HSBCs to be facilitating corruption and money laundering in South Africa, but once it gets to the attention of the global media and global politics, has happened, and I helped to do that, then they suffer enormous damage. and they start then to admit to their culpability, as many of them have done, sack the people involved. But why do we need to get to that point? They should have had systems in place that stopped this in the first place, stopped the money leaving South Africa at all. And they didn't, and they still aren't. And they've got to change and reform, and my evidence today has been directed at that.
And in one day you covered 10,000 pages, roughly, or in summary. Lord Peter Hain, thank you for 10,000 words, rather. Lord Peter Hain, thank you for your time. Of course, Shahan, important to note that one of the key messages of the evidence today is the role of the global financial system, something that has perhaps been quite neglected at proceedings to date. But now it's squarely on the agenda of the Commission, and we've heard from Chairperson Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo that will continue. 2 witnesses lined up for tomorrow, Reverend Frank Chikane and then General Yolisa Matakata.
All right, thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. Erin Bates is at the state capture inquiry.